Brandon looks like he's going somewhere special today, maybe a job interview. He's got a collar under a sweater. What's the occasion?
Football Coaches Association annual convention meetings. There's like 9,000 coaches here, and yeah,
where are you?
A lot of glad. It's in Charlotte. It's the one. I think this would set the Guinness World Records for loudest daps, because it's just a large convention hall and there's thousands of coaches and everybody daps. That's all they do. That no one shakes hands. Everybody's dapping. So it's very loud in there, and it's just constant clapping.
Who's like the big dog? Who's the star that everyone's like just looking to get a picture with or say hello to?
Great question. I would probably say, the problem is that the playoff is still going on. So like the coaches that are winning games, I would maybe say Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, because he's the young buck. And he just went to the playoff and he's here. A lot of coaches, the head coaches, they don't swing into like the last day, but Kenny Dillingham's someone who's very popular at things like this.
Well, let's take a look at these past couple of games. It almost feels like, the song. Now I can't even sing it.
Which one?
I don't know. It's where it's like, now it's time to say goodbye. Not MICKYMOUSC, but like Sinatra song where he's like,
I did it my way?
Yeah, it's over. It's like, I said goodbye. Like the season's almost over. We got one game left. So we're getting to that point here. We got Notre Dame. Let's go there first. Do you think the reason they're not hated as much right now? Two reasons. One, because they're playing Ohio State and Ohio State's hated. And two, because Marcus Freeman's like a really likable guy.
That, and I also think because Notre Dame was humbled earlier in the year by losing to Northern Illinois. And I think all of us wrote them off. And for so often, Notre Dame's always been the quote unquote overrated team, which is actually, if you look through it, the numbers, it's not actually statistically correct, because when they start in the top 10 in the preseason, they usually finish there or near there. So they're not really overrated. But I think what happened is everybody goes into preseason hating Notre Dame because of that. They think they're overrated. And then in week 2, they lose to Northern Illinois, and we're all like, ha, ha, ha. Told you, Notre Dame sucks. And then what do? Behind the scenes, they just keep winning. They bounce back from that. They handle it the right way. They're underdogs here in the playoff in a lot of games, and they just keep winning. Plus, as you said, Marcus Freeman is a nice guy. He's just a very agreeable guy, someone that you just get along with and comes along pretty well on screen. And all of a sudden, Notre Dame's become this just like underdog story. They finally are living up to like their Rudy legacy, so to speak.
Do you think there is any chance now, if Ohio State loses, that Ryan Day won't come back next year?
Oh, great question. Anything's possible. I think the one thing that really sticks with me with Ryan Day is just the stories that have come out about his family, just really just not liking all the pressure of that job. I mean, you've heard the stories of, and I've seen them too, at the game against Michigan, them crying on the sideline. Just the pressure's immense there, even when you win, let alone when you lose. And there's NFL opportunities out there. You haven't heard Ryan Day's name really come up tied directly with anything, but I'm sure that if he showed interest in an NFL job, one that's open now or might be open later, they would give him a sniff. I just don't know if I don't know if he's trying to do that himself. But I think that's the only way he leaves at this point is that the right NFL job comes open and he shows some interest.
Well, then can I offer a extremely hot take question? If he wins, could he leave? Because he's like, this is miserable.
Maybe. Yeah. Why not? Again, I think it just seems to be the pressure's immense. And listen, he could stand up there and say, this is what I signed up to do. And you know how not to get too psychological on you, but when you watch these press conferences, and I've been doing this for years, Bobby, it's just, you start to realize that coaches and people in everyday life, they're projecting. Whenever someone is criticizing you, it's usually a reflection of that own person. And so when I hear Ryan Day at practically every press conference saying, hey, this is what I signed up for. This is why they pay me the big bucks. It sounds like a guy that's trying to deal with this even internally himself. Like, how do I handle this? This is just this is just terrible. All the hate I get and the pressure I feel, and my family's under the gun all the time. And as I said, his family really affected by it. I've seen them crying on the sideline. Um, if you win a national championship, it's not going to get any better than that. It's impossible to get better than that. So why not just let that be your legacy at Ohio State? Why not just walk away? So yeah, Bobby, I could see that happening. He wins a national championship. I could see Ryan Day walking away and going to the NFL if the right opportunity presents itself.
What would he like? What is Ryan Day's? Obviously, he gave Chip Kelly the play calling duties, but like, where did he cut his teeth? Because again, mostly what I know of Ryan Day is the Ohio State guy who is next up, who can't beat Michigan. Like, what? It's been so overwhelmed. His story has been that I think most people don't know his origin story.
Well, I think that his origin story in a lot of ways is that he was an incredible assistant coach. Obviously, someone that was kind of in line under Urban Meyer previously to keep that going. He understood the culture. He understood how to build that thing out from what it was, even under Urban Meyer, because as we know, Urban Meyer went there. Urban Meyer really changed college football twice. And by that, I mean, he went to Florida and the SEC was strong, but he made it much different. He made it a situation where the SEC, other schools had to start raising their level. And I'm talking about like Alabama going on its run, of course, in the 2000 teens. That's because of Urban Meyer. He raised the level in the SEC. Then he goes to the Big Ten and he raised the level there. I'm not so sure Michigan would have won a national title this past year if it was not for Urban Meyer pushing Ohio State over the hump, because they were always there in the national conversation under Jim Tressel. And then Urban Meyer took it to a different level. And so Ohio State wanted to keep that going. So they bumped up Ryan Day to keep that going because he understood how that got that all going. And he's been more or less about as good as Jim Tressel, the guy before Urban Meyer. And Jim Tressel's a Hall of Fame type coach. Don't get me wrong, but it's not someone who was contending and winning a national title every 3 years or so, despite he had that run there in the early 2000s. And that's going to be the stigma on any coach at Ohio State. Like, if you don't win a national title, like in your first like 4 years on the job, you're just dog crap to a lot of people. And that's an issue. And we've seen it at Florida. The guys who replaced Urban Meyer there, like, they get pushed out quickly. And then so you not just go to Ohio State where they want to win national titles and they have Hall of Fame type coaches, but you get Urban Meyer to inject like this absolute nitrous oxide into the system of we got to win a national championship now. And then Ryan Day steps in as the disciple and he's not doing it. And also he's losing to the rival Michigan every year. You can imagine the pressure that goes with that. And I think Ryan Day gets an unfair shake. I think he's an incredible coach. It's just that he gets a bad rap for that. And every little movement of his is ridiculed. And Bobby, I mean, you saw it a few weeks ago at the game against Michigan. I followed him around, filming him just to kind of get his reaction after the loss. And of course that fight breaks out and Ryan Day kind of froze up and just stood there and watched it. And you could read in the body language and all that stuff. But the fans just absolutely jumped him for that. Like, why are you not a man of action? Why aren't you getting involved? Why aren't you pulling your players back, telling them to go back to the locker room, get away from that? Instead, you're just standing there being completely impotent. And again, every move of this guy is ridiculed. And so it goes back to your previous question. Like, even if he wins a national title, like, what else can you do there? If a job came open and it's going to be less pressure, why wouldn't you take it?
I remember he said, what happened? You had to read his lips when that fight was happening. He was like, what happened? And
yeah,
I felt like, he was even unfairly criticized. He really was wondering what happened. But I hear you. And let's go to that game first, Ohio State and Texas. How do you feel Texas played as far as what the expectation was of Texas when they played Ohio State?
I said going into that game that I would not be surprised if Texas takes an early lead. Well, that obviously didn't happen. Ohio State was about to jump on them. And then Travion Henderson had that personal foul penalty where he shoved a guy in the face, Ohio State's running back. And it stopped Ohio State from going up big early and allowed Texas to hang around. Texas had the horses defensively to slow down Ohio State. I think a lot of us knew that going into that game. I just didn't expect that offensively somehow they would have a chance late to win the game or even tie it as we saw late. But then the Quinn Ewers that I've grown accustomed to seeing popped up again. They're about to score late in the game to tie it, and he gets strip sacked. And they scoop and score and return it for a touchdown and go up 28-14, and the game's over. It's just that Quinn Ewers always seems in these big moments to always have a bad turnover or some situation. And, I'm not sold on Quinn Ewers as a future NFL guy. I know he's high on draft boards and everything, but man, when the pressure gets to him, and by pressure, I mean like defensive lineman, he just doesn't know how to act back there. And his pass success rate is just incredibly bad. And you can't have that. I mean, we're seeing in the NFL playoffs now, rookies that have done very well are first or second year guys. Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix with the Washington Commanders. Penix is a guy that I saw last season at Washington, and Washington beat Texas in the college football playoff. And it was because of Penix's just being calm and collected. And Texas had an incredible pass rush, but Penix was the guy that got them over the hump. And that translates. It translates to the NFL. He's now in the NFL winning, I think, the Commanders first. I mean, it's just incredible. Like all this stuff that you see with Michael Penix. And then obviously Jaden Daniels as well. Jaden is a special player, a Heisman Trophy winner. But you see these guys that were uber successful in college football, and it's translating to the NFL almost right away when they're given their chance. Quinn Ewers, when he gets to the NFL, I don't think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see a guy that's going to maybe bounce around from team to team trying to find a spot as a backup.
I think C.J. Stroud's another example of that, although he's not a rookie this year. Last year, he had a great rookie year coming out. So do you see any parallel? And I remember back in the day, Major Applewhite started quarterback at Texas, and it was like, we got to get Chris Sims in. We got to get Chris Sims in. Big controversy. You got Ewers, you got Arch Manning. Well, all of a sudden, when Chris Sims is in, they're like, dang, we kind of miss Applewhite. They're like, maybe we jumped the gun and we kind of miss Major Applewhite a little bit. Any parallel in your mind there at all?
Good question. I don't think so, because I do think Arch Manning is legit. Like, I mean, there'll be people like rumbling like in this second start potentially next season if he throws an interception. We're like, oh, Quinn Ewers wouldn't have done that. But I think more often than not, he's going to be able to make big plays because he's much different from Quinn Ewers from the standpoint that he can run the ball. We've seen that this year. They brought him into special packages just to run the ball and pick up first downs on third down or even fourth down even. And he's been very successful in doing that. And I don't think that having the Manning name bothers him or is going to get into his own brain. And I think he's going to live up to the hype. And to be quite honest with you, man, I mean, I know like people thought Quinn Ewers was great and then they would ridicule him from time to time. But man, I'll tell you what, I think the Texas fans were very patient with Quinn Ewers. I thought this season there were several times where they could have really called for Arch Manning to go in there. But maybe what calmed that down, you know what? It's incredible, actually, still that I think of it, because remember Quinn Ewers got injured and Arch Manning had to go in and start, a game or two. And you would think after seeing that, they would be like, no, just keep Quinn Ewers on the bench. Let's keep going Arch Manning. But I think a lot of people just saw, well, we're winning. We're still winning. This is Quinn Ewers' last year. Let's just ride this out. Let Arch Manning continue to develop in the backup role and coming on the field every now and again, giving us a taste of it. But I think it's probably the best thing for all parties at this point because Arch Manning didn't get that pressure to be a starter right away. He's had an opportunity to develop over these last couple of years, and I think he's ready to go, man. I think next season he's going to be a superstar for Texas.
So if it were 3 years ago or 3 years from now, I would think Quinn Ewers' best move would be going to the draft, maybe getting a second or third round draft. But because the money is so heavy right now in the portal, and it's not going to be like this for long. I would compare this to the time when the NFL decided, hey, rookies can't make $100 million. And I think Sam Bradford is one of the last rookies to be able to get that top pick and make money forever. Now they got a 4+1, you get rookie scale, contracts are only so much. But right now, look at Miami. and they just took the Georgia quarterback, and they're paying him roughly $4 million. If I were yours, I would probably go and make more money one more year somewhere else, that $3, $4, $5 million bucks, even if I could be a second or third round pick in the draft.
And those rumors have been out there about him maybe trying to get into the transfer portal. We haven't actually heard anything from his camp along those lines, but there's been discussions in the background among other schools about potentially trying to lure him. And I think there's definitely a point to be made there. Any quarterback, or for that matter, even receiver or something like that, a guy that you see that's not going to be a day one pick, or maybe is a borderline day 2 to day 3 pick in the NFL draft, like, why wouldn't you come back for another year in college football? Because, Bobby, you hit it right on the head. Like, the money, not to say it's going to dry up, but the money distribution model is going to change after this upcoming season. Revenue sharing is starting in college sports in July, but we've got kind of this stopgap between January and July where schools are able to just freely spend really whatever they want in NIL. And to keep players on campus, they're saying, hey, they're going to get revenue distribution here in July, but until then, here's a nice little, $1 million, $2 million. And for the high profile guys, like you mentioned, Carson Beck going to Miami, it's $3, $4, $5, $6. And listen, Carson, that's incredible money for Carson Beck. One, because he probably wasn't going to be selected highly in the NFL draft as far as day one, but also he just had surgery. He just had surgery on his elbow, his throwing elbow, and he's going to be out at least until July or August, not able to really throw or participate in practices. So he's going to get paid by Miami all the way up until that point. The revenue sharing model goes into effect starting in July. And so you get to go down there and get paid handsomely to recover and get your body right. And then maybe try, not maybe, but he's going to try and play this season. NFL, if you're trying to get all that done and you can't throw for the combine, any personal workouts, pro days and all that, your draft stock's just going to continue to fall. So this was a different type of situation than Saquon years, but this just made absolute perfect sense for Carson Beck. But I could see a scenario where Quinn Ewers is sitting there, and the deadline's coming up, obviously, here, but that he could maybe do it. But that chatter was really heating up going into that playoff game about a week ago, and it's kind of cooled since then. So it certainly looks like at this point he's probably going to go to the NFL draft.
Well, we saw Cam Moore, too, get a 3rd, 4th, 5th round grade last year and go to Miami, and now he's going to be the number 1 or 2 overall pick. So I also think that there's an example of it actually working while also making a lot of money, more money than you're going to make in your first couple to few years in the NFL. I have 2 final questions. One, James Franklin, he lost another one. I'll say what everybody says. Can't win the big game. What do you say?
Can't win the big game. Yeah. I mean, he's what, 1-18 against the AP top 5 in his career, including his days back at Vanderbilt, 1-15 or 1-16 there at Penn State. And, I know a lot of people go, well, listen, he won 2 playoff games, and yeah, that's great, but they weren't top 5 type programs. I mean, SMU obviously in the first round. But it's almost, people go, well, that game wasn't his fault. It wasn't coaching mistakes that led to their loss. It was Drew Aller throwing the interception late. And my argument for that is that players play the way their coaches coach and act on the sidelines and throughout game week. And it just seems like Penn State, it's not just this year, but every year, when it comes down to crunch time late in games, they find a way to lose. And losers find a way to lose. Winners don't find ways to lose. And the common denominator in all that has been James Franklin on the sideline. I think he's a great coach. I don't think he's an elite coach. Elite coaches win top 5 games 1 out of every 3 times. He doesn't do that at all.
Championship game, does Notre Dame have a puncher's chance?
I think so. The defense has been incredible all season. I think a lot of people are underplaying the idea that Notre Dame can match up well against Jeremiah Smith, the receiver, freshman phenom for Ohio State. I think that they could potentially slow down that passing game. And look, just this past game, Texas, their defense slowed down Jeremiah Smith. 1 catch for 3 yards. And Smith, as we saw, exploded in that Rose Bowl against Oregon just a week prior to that, and was great in the first round game against Tennessee. but Texas slowed him down. The key for Notre Dame is to play well on the outside, keep Jeremiah Smith in check, and that defensive line where they've lost their top defensive tackle, Riley Mills, led them in sacks, 7.5 sacks. They've been playing without him the last 2 games and done very well. They got to slow that run game down and kind of make Ohio State a little bit one-dimensional. And by being one-dimensional, I think you make Ohio State one-dimensional by forcing them to run the ball. And that's how you beat them, because that's how Michigan beat them. I mean, Ohio State kept trying to run the ball against them, and they couldn't do it. And then they refused to pass the ball for whatever reason. But if you can slow the passing game and force Ohio State to run the ball, I really like Notre Dame's chances.
I've been watching your podcast with your wife. How'd you get your wife to do a podcast with you?
It was really kind of her idea. She's been talking about it for years. She even came up with a name for it that's not safe for work.
It's safe for here, though.
So we had to. Okay, she wanted to call it Basic Bitch Predicts.
I love it.
That's what she wanted to call it. But I was like, we can't do that. It's derogatory and all that. It's bad enough that we're doing a podcast together where it seems like I'm talking down to her. But the whole idea is that the idea of the show is she likes college football. She just doesn't know the ins and outs of it. And at home, we barely talk about football or my job. And so this is an opportunity for her to learn more about what I do for a living, but also kind of she gets to ask just bare bones questions about what's actually going on in the game. And she gets to present ideas that I think every common fan thinks about, but is afraid to say because they'll be labeled as dumb or not in the know. And she's just freely out there asking those questions. And, we've done a couple of episodes so far. I think they're going to get a lot better. We've talked about, because we just kind of just sat down and said, let's do this. And we've talked it over and we've got some good ideas. And she's been holding back a little bit on the show. And I can't wait till she fully unleashes herself.
Yeah, it's called Basic AF, but Basic Ass Football, right?
Yeah, much better than the first recommendation from my wife. But I did laugh when she brought it up.
You guys check out the podcast. I watch it on YouTube. Brandon Marcello, thank you so much for being with us over the last 10, 12 weeks. Big fan of your work. You need a vacation, so after this game, I hope you get one. I hope they celebrate you at the coaches conference. And good to see you again, my friend. And hopefully I'll see you soon in person up in Fayetteville.
Appreciate you, Bobby. Yeah, the coach is going to carry me out off of the convention floor.
Very Rudy-like. All right, Brandon, see you, buddy.